I wonder if there's something that Dr. Peter would like to talk about, you know? Man, you're messing with the intro. I'm gonna get mine. I'll do the time. If you can do the time, don't tell me how you all get down. When it's hard in my face, but you play me like a clown, it's your fool, bitch. So just step back. I'm mad that when I come down, set. I thought you were my piece, but you played me out. Now I'm mad as hell, and I'm full of doubts. Who you wanna roll with? Who you wanna roll with? Let's see. Let's go. Who you wanna roll with? Who you wanna roll with? Let's see.
How are you?
Let's roll.
How are you?
I'm back on the scene, it's time to get mean. I'm a lean. Revolution machine. For what people stand, they stay this way. 1, 2 day is good as any day. Y'all feel slightly displaced, resist. Raise your fist and pump like this. Promises all up top. Don't cross the line. But you know it's fun. Who you wanna roll with? Who you wanna roll with? Let's see. Let's go. Who you wanna roll with? Who you wanna roll with? Let's see. Let's go.
Are you feeling bad? 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 Yeah. Are you feeling bad? Are you feeling bad?
We have a cure for that.
Are you feeling bad?
We have a cure for your madness and your sadness. He's blowing it up right now. Who you want to roll with? Big Bear.
Roll with. Who you wanna roll with? Who you wanna roll with?
Big Bear.
Let's go. Who you wanna roll with? Who you wanna roll with?
Big Bear.
Let's go. Who you wanna roll with? 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 Who you wanna roll with?
Jim's in the cloud already. I love it.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Are you feeling kind of sad? Yeah.
Feeling bad? Are you feeling kind of sad too? You're. Yeah, you're.
Yeah, you are.
We got something for you.
What you got? Boom, 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 boom.
Big fat blunt will make you feel better.
Always.
Even when I'm sad, blunt makes me feel good.
Always.
Always.
Every single time.
Mm-mm.
Every single time.
Blunts will never steal your joy. Well, unless it's really crap weed. All right. If it has a seed in it and a stem, maybe that might steal your joy a little bit.
Seed might make me mad a little bit.
That might make me feel a little mad. Don't put no seeds in that blunt.
Don't put no seeds in there. Please. No, don't do it. I don't like it.
I know people that don't care. Jim, when they had the Mississippi weed that they gave to Elvie and the other patients from the government, it was rolled up with seeds and stems, right?
Oh yeah.
Oh, that's wild.
Cigarettes.
Yeah.
Cigarette size done on a rolling machine, 300 in a tin, 10 a day.
Oh, they just didn't care.
And they grinded it all up together. And what didn't get ground up, they would take out the stems and the seeds.
The stems were not well ground. They that Irv Rosenfeld saved all his seeds and stems for at least a year. It might have gone into a second year, and then
to see them in the tin. It wasn't like, well, look, it covers the bottom of the tin. It was piled up with some stems. Elvie would break hers open and then like put hash oil on it and re-roll it or something, on the paper. She just kind of used it as a carrier system for other things. It was medically not very sound. But it was nice. It was nice having her or anybody when it was illegal everywhere. It wasn't legal in any states, and except for medically speaking. But for her to be legal in New Jersey was why we'd get her here a couple of times because she could smoke while she was having something to say. While News 12 would be there or something, and
that's insightful. You're smoking.
Pretty sure there's still 3 legal patients. It's like the dying off of World War II veterans and stuff,
Crazy. I've smoked some of that weed that LV had, and it was awful.
Oh,
Mississippi.
It hurt. It was harsh.
Not awful.
It was terrible, and I gave her some real weed to smoke.
Oh yeah.
That weed was harsh. It was dry.
Yeah.
It tasted like crap. It tasted like regs.
Yeah.
Bad regs. Like
bad. That was
no love
It
given.
wasn't even good reg. It was bad reg.
Bad regs. Yuck.
Good reg. You gave me bad reg.
And these are for medical patients. Federal. This is the federal government, though.
So it was the lowest of the lowest Reggie.
Yeah.
And that's what they used for clinical studies. That was what was available. That's still pretty much what was available.
But that's not weed. How do you get?
Yeah, that's not even weed.
Yeah.
Hi, Sue.
What's up, Sue?
Like, how do you get real effects from trash? Like, let's do our study on trash and give them the results.
So, trying to find my. I had some questions written down.
I have a lot of questions.
Oh, good.
Yeah. I just want to tell you guys about this here. There's this organization. It's called Beyond Ibogaine Treatment, and they thanked us for our important work because we got into a little discussion earlier today about using non-professionals, treating patients under the influence of controlled substances. And I told them what they're advocating for goes against our ethical responsibilities and the very grain of delivering safe care, blah, blah, blah. The government chimed in also, but that was with the Veterans Administration because and I didn't know this, but they claim to have the largest healthcare system in the country. They say they have both the capacity and capability to develop and scale new treatment modalities. So I thought that was pretty interesting. Anyway, I just wanted to share that with you. So I invited them to come and talk with us sometime, and I'll follow up with that more. I mean, they were very cordial, but of course they were, but yeah.
What was it? I missed the.
Well, first the discussion started about,
who are they? Who was this with though, specifically?
Who are they?
The Beyond Ibogaine, whatever. Did you say?
Beyond, BEOND Ibogaine, and they were talking about,
that's the name of a group.
Yeah.
Okay.
An organization. They were talking about, different uses for Ibogaine, especially in addiction. Anyway, so I was just like, kind of following along with it. But then somebody chimed in about that there's no control and there's no testing on our CBD products, that we have right now out there. And this was somebody, it wasn't a healthcare professional or anything like that. I don't know what she was, some kind of public policy person. And, I kind of said, that's not necessarily true. There's some like really, there's decent companies out there, because what she was calling for was to perhaps cease production of any further CBD products until, this happens. So I was like, whoa, wait a minute. Like we've got some reliable, people out there, look at the Stanley brothers, with Charlotte's Web. There's people that depend on CBD for a variety of things, and to want to just call like a big halt like that, that's a little bit crazy. So I don't know. I'll see where that goes. They kind of were trying to blow me off.
When studies aren't being done and somebody says we shouldn't do something until studies are being done, it's a little disingenuous if they're not making every effort to get this shit started. Well, then let's start studying, I mean, what always bothered me about the MS Society was they talk about studies weren't being done. They're the largest research organization concerning MS in the world. And I'd be like, okay, you're a research organization saying there are no studies being done. What am I missing here?
Yeah, I know.
Is there any effort being made to do them?
Hopkins studies everything. John Hopkins will study, the things we couldn't even imagine.
This is something Dr. Peter Grinspoon talked about it. I was watching a little over a week ago, one of his he's on a podcast, but he was more or less like it wasn't like taking questions like a press conference or anything. Mm-hmm. He was just talking, and really good. He wasn't wandering about. It was easy to stay interested. Well, for me, yeah. Mm-hmm. And but he was talking about the difference between random controlled studies or CS, and then real world studies, RWE, real world experience, whatever, and how in the absence of gold standard studies that they really are a benefit, and why. And he doesn't speak too far above or too far below anybody. And it's just it was very interesting watching. He had a lot to say, and didn't seem to really miss a beat often. He's pretty good about just what do you think we need to know? It's sort of like if I had one question to ask him, I don't know what it would be. Well, it's also it's like he doesn't at all live in the shadow of his father. He's his own researcher, his own person, but he was like born into this strange world where Carl Sagan might be there at dinner, and when did he find out that his dad, he was 4 years old when his dad was the witness for the defense in the deportation hearings for John Lennon. Mm-hmm. So he's only 4, but at some time as he's growing up, I gotta wonder what would it be like, when as you're growing up, really an adolescent, because it's hard. A concept of marijuana for a real youngster, it's kind of I would think hard to grasp at an adult level. And
no, you know what, he was. I think he continues to have a good advantage because he is in Harvard. He's at Harvard.
Yeah.
And the Harvard Psychedelic Club.
No, I don't know about that, but it sounds interesting.
That's where that's really where it all began, and there's so much information that travels out of there. So,
but it's therefore ironic and not real cool that his dad didn't become a full professor because at Harvard back in his day, they weren't real keen on what he was finding out about marijuana. He was supposed to be helping kids understand why it's bad, and he keeps coming back with it's for that. Yeah, it's not for them, but it can be real good for sick people, And
well, the intention with these, these four brilliant men, they promised that they wouldn't, test these substances on undergrads and just use graduate students. And of course, Timothy Leary did whatever he wanted, because that's who he was. So that's where that disconnect happened, because people complained, and he had different houses where he had bunches of undergrads living in and what have you. So it's pretty interesting because like what they did, I'll give them all credit for that. What they did, I thought it was pretty amazing. It was pretty cool.
I'm not real familiar with it.
Read the book. I'll give it to you. The book is good. It's not a hard read. It's really good. Hi, Peter.
Hey, how are you guys?
Good.
Great.
We're good. We're happy to see you.
Yeah, no, nice to see you guys. My other computer, like, it was weird. The camera wasn't. I could see myself on camera, but it wasn't being recognized by SteamYard, so I had to switch computers.
Workaround.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, welcome to the podcast, Peter. Great to see you.
Great to see you. Very happy to be here.
We're happy to have you.
You have a long history. Jim actually met your father at the Normal Conference in 2001?
2000, I think. 2000 or 2001. Yeah, and met your mom and dad, and it was having been trying to convince people since about 1990 that cannabis could be very good for MS patients, because my late wife had primary progressive, pretty steady downhill until, if she had used cannabis recreationally, she probably would have known a lot sooner. And I didn't know. And, so I found out around 89 or 1990, but it's hard for me to impart to people now how difficult that dark age was when it was, well, there's no studies to prove that. There's no studies to prove it. And I'd say, but there's no studies proving it doesn't work either. I mean, there's no studies. So when I look back at a podcast or two that you've done I know about you through you being your father's son, and I know that you're your own. Here's something that it seems like you're unique to me, and all the time I've done things in this regard, I hear a lot of people say, yeah, I've been involved with cannabis issues my whole life. And it's like literally you were born into it. So I don't know anybody other than you that could literally be able to say that. And
I'm definitely second generation. There's no question.
Yeah.
When my kids went into it, they'd be third generation, but they're so sick of hearing about it.
You got to wonder, too. And, so of course, hearing at the Normal Conference that Dad was at, it was very special because he's a keynote speaker, and on Sunday morning he was going to have a more personal talk about cannabis in his life. So
that's interesting that it was in the year 2000 or 2001, because 10 years earlier he wouldn't have tried it or even admitted to using it. So he really evolved along those lines.
He talked about it too. He explained to us, he said, after all this time not using it and learning what he learned and being expert witness for defense in many, many cases, he asked the prosecutor, whom he regularly knew, why don't you ask me you never ask if I used marijuana or have? And he goes, because it's irrelevant. And then he went on to
I've heard that story so many times.
Yeah, I bet you have. And now I'm giving it to you third hand. Isn't that something?
Exactly. The version the most recent version that he gave about that. I'm just looking for my water bottle. That's okay. The most recent, Liz, get a second. Give me some water. You don't have to, but just when you get it. The version I heard is that he was testifying, and I got it right here. This hostile sort of Republican anti-cannabis person. Of course, all the politicians were sort of anti-cannabis, but in particular, this hostile Republican said, "Dr. Grinspoon, have you used cannabis yourself?" And ironically, he hadn't at that point. And he said, "I'll answer that question if first you'll let me know if that would give me more or less credibility in the issue."
Okay. Yeah, it's a pretty parallel track there.
Yeah, and the guy got pretty pissed off.
I was really taken by what you were explaining, that the real world experience in the absence of random controlled studies, how important that could be. And just real quick, because it's not about me tonight, but when Cheryl, my lady, she could only move her head and shoulders a little bit, and she had real tight tonic spasticity. So
MS is horrible disease.
Yeah, we decided that if there's no tests, and we keep hearing about it, it was 1997, that it was announced in the Star Ledger that we were going to commit an act of civil disobedience at the State House. So that got the press out, and we did our own test. I lifted her out of her chair, and instead of wanting to fall through my arms, of course, she stiffened up like an uncooked piece of spaghetti. And then I put her in a hospital bed that we brought to the front of the State House. So there she is in a hospital bed outside, which looked very strange. I'd never actually seen one outside, and it was her own bed. And what we did was Dr. Dennis Augustine from California sent me some tincture, and it had the most amazing effect on her. So we wanted to demonstrate it. And when I lifted her out and put her in, she was like straight, and it hurt her. She had pain. And then what I did is I mixed a little bit with some Gatorade, and she drank it. And then I opened up an unadulterated can of Coca-Cola, because she liked Coca-Cola. And I said, now in the next hour, the only thing she's going to consume after this is Coca-Cola. And there you go. So that they would be able to see a striking difference an hour later, that, if I lifted her leg up, it would want to fall to the side. When I lift her out of the chair, instead of her tonic spasticity kicking in, and so, my attitude was, now, if there's never been any studies, this is the best study ever done, and I know it's not a double-blind, placebo-controlled clinical crossover gold standard, but it's the best there's ever been done. So if somebody wants to do better, want to prove it wrong, go ahead. But then the state police realized what was going on, and they refused to accept it, to have it tested, because that was the proof I needed. I needed it to be tested to show what it was, and they wouldn't do it. I was kind of surprised by that, But you could answer a question for me. Was I accurate? I did not think to me that with tonic spasticity not being of the cerebral cortex, like when you chop a chicken's head off, it's running around. That's spasticity. It's not subject, in my mind, wouldn't be subject to a placebo need control, because it wouldn't matter what a person thought. They were going to have a spastic reaction or not, whether they thought they would. So, I don't know that I was being accurate about. Is there a time like that when the placebo concern isn't a concern?
Well, that's a multifaceted question. First of all, it's hard to do randomized controlled trials on cannabis for a couple of reasons. One is cannabis gets you high. Like, most people notice if they've been given cannabis or a sugar pill. And number two, cannabis does about 5 things at once. It helps with pain, perception of pain, muscle spasticity, depression, anxiety. And, randomized control trials, they usually just give you like one molecule, and it does one thing. So it's really hard to do the randomized control trial. But don't underestimate the power of placebo. I mean, it's really amazing. Like, on a scale of 1 to 10, the placebo gives you will lower you from like a 7 to like a 4. I mean, it really, really is positive.
With spasticity?
Yeah,
I understand pain relief and other areas of it, but
Yeah, with spasticity too. I don't think it's as drastic as with pain, but I think the placebo effect does affect spasticity
Interesting.
because it's like a feedback loop. You're anxious, muscles clench up, you get more anxious. I mean, there's a lot of even if it's not like a loop directly through the brain has a huge effect on it. And the placebo effect's amazing. I mean, doctors used to be allowed to give sugar pills. Now we're not allowed to give sugar pills anymore because they think it's not like informed consent. It's like tricking the patient. But my dad actually, to go back to my dad, was on an airplane. I mean, he was a great psychiatrist. And this woman started freaking out. She was really afraid of flying. They go, "Is there a doctor on the flight?" And my dad stood up. And they asked him to sit next to her. And he gave her a pill and said, "This is going to relax you. In about 15 minutes, you're going to fall asleep." And she just assumed he was giving her a sedative, but he just gave her a sugar pill. Back then, he used to travel around with his old-fashioned doctor bag. And again, back then, it was legal to give sugar pills. And she literally calmed down, fell asleep, woke up relaxed. They were able to land the plane where they were heading to their destination. They didn't have to do an emergency landing. And she had been totally freaking out. And this was all the placebo effect. So the placebo effect's huge. So in a perfect world, you do want to do studies to factor out the placebo effect. But I think they're really hard to do with cannabis and with psychedelics. It's kind of funny. They're giving people the placebo with these like psychedelics, and even more than cannabis, most people would notice if they're on like DMT
Oh yeah, you would.
versus a sugar pill. So
well, let's there's a million things I'd love to run by you in a discussion in a more social setting, but I know everybody is like really happy you're here. And Sue being a lifelong registered nurse, and well, more than that, I imagine she's wanting to pick your brain about stuff. But if there's something you think we might want to know that would make us better advocates, but later on, if just real quick before I shut up, which is rare, as anybody will tell you, what I would always like is a better way to a short explanation about the function of the endocannabinoid system, because that's where it's not too hard to be the smartest guy in the room with a small amount of information, and it puts other people a little back if they want to start talking about what is and isn't, and they don't know about that. I would like to know more, but like it's just the right level. And when you mentioned as a neurotransmitter, and that there are other systems, it was like the what do you call it, the air traffic controller, that it was the one that kind of organized you. This is something, obviously I'm not prepared to tell people about that, but that sounded like something that other people could relate to, and I'd never heard it explained like that. So not necessarily right now, but somewhere if you touched on that, I'd appreciate it.
Absolutely, happy to.
Yeah.
So how long are we going for? Hour and a half?
Well, that's kind of up to you.
Oh, anything's fine. Let me just run to the bathroom if it's going to be like an hour and a half. Give me 2 seconds. I think, and then I'm ready to start. So give me just 1 second.
Sure, we're gonna smoke a joint too while we're waiting, and take a water break, and we'll probably take a pee break too. I'm sure. I'm all good with the hey water break, hydrate. Yeah. We got another blunt going, and I have questions. I have my 3 questions that I always ask everyone. In his book, he wrote.
What's your favorite munchie food?
Yeah, those kind of fun questions. And
well, I tell you another thing. The way he had this like about a 3.5 minute video, his relationship with cannabis, and it was, it's key to how he approaches things, and when everything's aligned just right, that it's still an amazing experience to create something or research or try and connect dots together for something. And fascinating indeed. Okay.
In your book, you talked about the first time you tried cannabis, but was that the actual first time you actually got stoned from cannabis? Did you actually get stoned that time?
No, I almost coughed myself to death, but I didn't get stoned. The first time I started getting high when I was like 13, with my twin brother, and we were just really curious about it. We heard about it the whole that's all we heard about. And I think it's kind of interesting that my dad's like, back then his attitude was he shouldn't use it until age 18 because that was the drinking age back then. But it just like if you have curious kids and you're talking about it all the time, and everybody's in your living room using it and laughing and having great conversations, of course you're going to want to try it.
So your twin brother and you both tried. I'll call it marijuana. It wasn't cannabis back then. It sounded like I was trying to be smart. You're just trying to sound smart.
It was weed.
Yeah, or
It was
but
pot.
for
It was
the same
pot.
time,
We were a
yeah.
bunch of potheads.
Yeah. So what was your like? My first time, I missed a driveway. It was on one side of a tree or another, and this is hard at night, and a place I'd always gone to, and I thought, oh crap, is this high? I didn't feel it coming. I drank before, and I just got all flustered. And
Yeah, you got a crazy story like that.
Well, I remember like just being with my twin brother and like a friend or two. We were like 13, and we'd smoke, and we'd be like, "Are we high? Is this what being high is like?" And once you are high, you know that you're high. But if you've never been high before, and the weird thing is, people can use it like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times and have no effect like the first time. So we'd just be sitting around exactly like that. Are we high? But with alcohol, you don't have that problem. You just feel
no,
it.
Yeah, it tells you when you're drinking. I liked somebody explaining to me that they weren't high without taking a breath for like 5 minutes, how they knew they weren't high. And the reason I know I'm not high, and and it was like this person hardly ever talked. And it was sort of like you'd listen to why they knew they weren't, And
my parents got my aunt high. She's now 96, and she's like, this marijuana didn't do anything, but these cookies are the best cookies I've ever had in my life. That's really
Can I have more?
Yeah. Exactly. So it's
pretty. Well,
I was the same age that you said you were when you first tried smoking weed, and I don't think I was high either. I don't remember. In fact, I remember saying, "Should I smoke some more?" Like I didn't know what to do with it. I didn't know how I was supposed to feel. Just like you said, you don't know how you're supposed to feel. But the second time, I knew it was high.
Why is that? Is there a medical reason why we don't get high the first time?
I don't think they really know. I remember talking to my dad about this, and he thought it had to do something with like you have to kindle the receptors to make them work. But that's a little weird because other receptors aren't like that. Like you take an opiate the first time, you feel like the effects of the opiate. But I think it has to do something with like kindling the receptors. There's nothing else that really makes sense. Because
that would make sense.
It's really bizarre because we have the cannabinoid receptors, and then if you smoke, it triggers your receptors. Like why? And the receptors are working. That's how we do everything else. Feel pain, memory, temperature, hunger. So the receptors are working. So it's sort of a mystery why the first time or the second time you take these big quantities of external cannabinoids like THC, it doesn't do anything. I think that's still a mystery. Someone should figure that out. That'd be really helpful.
My first high, I was very, very high. First time I got high.
Well, that's the thing. It's hard to recreate that unless you stop for a year. So
yeah.
Well, fortunately,
but he's young. He's pretty young, so like he's got all those hybrids, that we didn't have before.
Oh yeah, yeah.
My first time smoking, I had some quote unquote real weed. So it was one of those you literally smoke the tip and got to put it out and come back to it because it would get you that high.
Yeah, this ain't your Woodstock weed.
Like, seriously.
Yeah.
But it was a good high. So, you would want to put it out and come back to it because it's like, okay, I'm feeling good. Let me stop while I'm ahead.
Exactly.
Yeah, but see, back in the day when it wasn't, who knows what you were smoking? There was no sativa and indica. It was, this is laughing weed. Oh, this is sleep. It makes me tired. This one, this one. Okay, well, there were all that, but I mean, you weren't going anywhere if you didn't have like an album cover or frisbee or something to get the seeds out with. It just, and nobody understands how quickly you can ruin a nice little carpet in your car if a seed pops and you don't get it in time. It's like
Oh, man.
seeds popping, you know. So yeah, I didn't at all get high the first time. It was that second time where, you know, it's nice to know a friend's driveway. It's in the woods. You don't see anything else. It's a pretty main road. It's just wood section. And it was like, okay, it's right before the third telephone pole. And then I realized I was just first or second or you know, and I'm moving and I got real flustered and I took a shot and it wasn't a driveway. And then I realized right down how I got so flustered when normally I think it was funny. I was 17, you know, I mean, 18. Everything was funny then. And then I thought, oh, wow. Okay. You know,
So I got a fun question for you. You've probably never been asked this, but what is your favorite munchie food?
I would say,
everybody gets that.
yeah, I would say probably Chinese food. I don't know why, but it's like you don't want to be around me when the Chinese food arrives if I've been smoking.
Are you Jewish? Are you
Yeah.
Jewish? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that explains it.
But I like
My
anything
husband's
salty.
Jewish. My husband's Jewish. I'm allowed to say that. So
Of course, no, absolutely. But you know, some people seem to be in like the salty category, and some people are in like the sweet category. And I'm like really in the salty category. I don't know why. Anything salty, like chips, I'm happy as can be.
I can do either or. But I do want to tell you this. Okay, so here was something that, like, you know, as a young girl, that, you know, my girlfriends and I, what we discovered was, and this was by sheer accident because we were just smoking and having a good time whenever. And so when it came time for those monthly period cramps, and I can't say it was me personally, but one of us said, smoke joints makes me feel better, you know, and you know what? And it did. So that started like that whole kind of, you know, snowball, that, you know, if you had a migraine or what have you, smoke a joint, you're going to feel better. Or if you stayed out all night, right, and you were tired the next day, if you smoked a joint, you felt better. So it just, you know, it just escalated like that. And that was like a pretty cool thing to like experience with not knowing really what we were doing. You know, we didn't attribute it to anything really, just smoke a joint, it makes you feel better.
Absolutely. And then
No hangover.
a lot of I think a lot of doctors haven't quite wrapped their brains around that, because a medicine could like obliterate the symptom, and cannabis can sort of make you not as bothered by the symptom. And, you know, in a lot of ways, it's just as good. It's such a paradigm shift. It's like a very different thing than a lot of the things we give, you know, ibuprofen, Tylenol. I don't know. Cannabis does so many things at once.
Yeah, well, the time that, and I know Lefty seems to remember this, when I'd gone back and forth with the MS Society for decades or more, and Dr. Stephen Reingold, their main research guy, and Dr. Donald Abrams, their president, they were always used when Cheryl and I were the go-to source throughout the 90s in New Jersey for medical marijuana, because there was nobody else in New Jersey. I didn't know anybody in the 90s in New Jersey that was an advocate for the entire decade. And every time we were in the news for whatever it would be, usually collaring a politician somewhere, and, you know, Cheryl with her reclining wheelchair, everybody gravitated toward her before, politically speaking, some found out, oops, I didn't really want to go talk to her. That didn't work out well. But oh, I forgot where I was going with that. That's
Jim's smoking good.
Yeah, Jim's got the good weed over there.
well, I do. I plan to be. I told myself if I had enough, I'd be a better listener. That didn't work. That's not working out too much either.
So Chris Goldstein's on the line with us. Hi, Chris. How are
What's up,
you,
brother?
Hey, how are you? And Peter, it's great to see you.
Great to see you. How you doing?
Oh, I'm doing well. I was just, you know, I was looking at this page I created for your dad, Lester for Harvard professor. And it was like one of the weird things about the marijuana thing that there was like this right at the end of his thing there. They hadn't done his full professorship. So we're pulling for him to get his full professorship there at Harvard there.
No, that's awesome. You know, I wonder, there was this really good editorial about that in the Harvard Crimson in 2018 called Grinspoon Reconsidered. But I don't know if they didn't promote him because of his book on cannabis or because of his book on psychedelics, because they hated the book on psychedelics. They really did, which is such an irony because now, like, I'm at MGH at Harvard, and we have this beautiful center for the study of psychedelics. But he told me the story of he went to a combined psychiatry. All the psychiatry departments at Harvard were merged together, and the new head walked up to him, who he hadn't met before, in front of like hundreds of staff members, and said, "I've seen your new book on psychedelics and I don't like it one bit," and like stormed away, like in front of hundreds of people. That was like the first thing he said to me. They hadn't even met each other yet. So it's interesting whether it's cannabis or psychedelics. I don't think they liked either. I also have a letter where they told him not to talk about cannabis at work because they didn't want it to seem like his work was supporting cannabis. But like, of course we're allowed to talk about whatever we want at work. You know what I mean? As long as we don't represent it as like our employer. So yeah, he was a little ahead of his time, for better and for worse, right?
Peter, I have a question for you.
Yeah.
No, go ahead, Chris. I'm sorry. Okay, Peter, I have a question for you. Okay, so this has been an ongoing back and forth with me and a group of others. Would you consider cannabis a hallucinogen?
Yes, absolutely. Anybody who's accidentally taken too much, like an edible that's too strong or something, knows that can be a hallucinogen. And I think cannabis is a psychedelic. I mean, I talk in my recent book, Seeing Through the Smoke, about this mystery of why like the psychiatrists have been so anti-cannabis from like the beginning of time, yet they're so pro psychedelics. And I'm like, cannabis is a psychedelic. It's like they're weaker than a psychedelic. Why would you? I mean, there are a lot of different theories about them, but it's really, is it a white drug, black drug? Is it that, there's more evidence of the kind of that they like for psychedelics and there's cannabis, or is it just cannabis paved the way for psychedelics? So it is weird though. I think cannabis is a psychedelic. In fact, I might write a blog about that. I was thinking about that the other day, but it's really weird how like the medical community is coming around with cannabis because like so many patients support it. Like if you're like just against it, like nobody listens to you anymore. But
yeah,
they've really been on the bandwagon for psychedelics, and cannabis has been like pulling teeth to get them to take it seriously.
Mm-hmm.
I used to work with remember Jehan Marku?
Jehan's a nice guy.
Yeah, Jehan used to describe marijuana as the lowest level of cannabis as the lowest level hallucinogen. Basically, it occupied the space of, if you were going to classify hallucinogens, it would be the absolute least powerful hallucinogen, but in the category. And he used to say it was because of like the indole ring, or how it really like worked in ways like hallucinogens do in the brain. So yeah, and I think that makes a lot of sense too. It makes a lot of sense in how people use it medicinally and for behavior and for mental health.
I mean, it all depends on the dose, right? I mean, if you microdose psilocybin or LSD, it's not a hallucinogen. But if you take a huge dose, it is a hallucinogen. And cannabis, if you take a modest dose, it's not. And if you take a huge dose, it is. So I agree that it's less hallucinogenic than like the classic psychedelics. But I also think it's like depends on the dose.
Yeah. Because you know what? I think because cannabis has been really talked about and really been out there, among so many. And that you can there's control, there's control settings, I know if I smoke too much of such and such, how I'm going to feel, so I don't want to hide under the table all day, or what have you. However, when you go into the other psychedelics, when you go into, and I'm not even going to say ketamine because ketamine's an anesthetic and that's in a different ball game for me. And we can talk about how you feel about that if you want to. But the other hallucinogenics, you really don't have a handle on how it's going to affect someone, even though the same goes for cannabis, but it's at a lower level. It's not when people think of hallucinogenics, they think of, okay, you're going to hallucinate, you're going to see, all those posters we used to look at and, all those black lights we used and what have you, but it's not the same with cannabis. Cannabis has always been the relaxing thing to do, not the I'm going to trip out and have no control over, my behavior or, what I'm doing or what I'm even thinking.
No, absolutely. But cannabis is a lot stronger than it used to be back then.
Now it is, yes.
And I think that we could do so much better job of preventing. I think there are a lot of accidental sort of overconsumption. You go to a dispensary in Maine and they have like sodas with like 100 milligrams. Like, if I take more than like 15 milligrams, I don't have a good time at all. Like there just needs to be more education for like people, like what is a good dose. We could avoid so many of these problems. I was speaking to a bunch of addiction psychiatrists in a dispensary, and they had a chocolate bar with 1,100 milligrams. Like each little chunk was 110 milligrams. I'm like, why would you make it that strong? I mean, I can get that like somebody might need that high dose, but for like 99.5% of people, that would put them in the emergency room. I mean, that's, so I just think I think you can have a really, really bad experience if you take too much cannabis. I certainly have. It's not fun at all. I don't think it's bad as like a bad LSD trip, but people really do have these panic attacks. So I just think the more we bring it out of the shadows, the safer it becomes.
I have to say, I took Marinol pills once, which is, of course, a 100% pure synthetic THC, just for a personal experiment. And it was a little bit tough to get off the couch for like 8 hours. It was a very sedative effect.
Wow.
Oh, it was very sedative. I took 2 Marinol pills, and I swear you would have had to gotten a forklift to get me off the couch that day.
Wow, really?
But I have to say, I'm a super lightweight when it comes to any edibles. I can smoke a half ounce of marijuana in a 24-hour period and be nearly unaffected. But if you give me 5 or 10 milligrams of edibles, it has a really, really kind of profound effect on me.
Wow, that's amazing. I tried Marinol once, and I kind of found it like sort of boring. It was sort of like, it just made me really fuzzy headed, but I didn't have any interesting thoughts. And I was very disappointed with Marinol, but I think a lot of people are actually. I mean, that's the whole thing about the entourage effect. Like, why take that out?
I had a interesting
weird
experience. Marinol was what Cheryl was prescribed starting about 1993 off label. The head of neurology at what then Paul Kimball Hospital just looked it up and said there's no reason I wouldn't. I can't recommend marijuana for you. And she would take 20 milligrams a day and 5 milligram pills. And when I tried it, I didn't like it because it was the same thing. I felt like I was getting high, but I wasn't my thoughts weren't lining up.
Yeah.
I was doing some siding. I was bending over at the hips, cutting some siding, and I stood up, and I thought I was facing the road. I'm facing the house. What the hell? And it didn't come with any benefits for me.
No, exactly. It's like you're high, but it's not fun. It's like, what's the point?
But for people who had never had it, this colliding of worlds. When Cheryl died, there was a memorial to the Supreme Court for it, and had a lobbying session with some congressional representatives and stuff, and had a really big gathering at Normal's office where there was an exchange of Marinol for herb. It was like patients were like, "Oh, I'll trade you all," and it was funny because it was the other people just really wanted to know what it was like, and the same with Cheryl. She had a pleasant time as could be with cannabis, but the other Marinol got rid of her pain, and it loosened her up hardly at all. And
I mean,
like Chris said, though, like Chris said, what, you took 2 Marinol pills, right? And you were on the couch all day.
Yeah.
So you didn't actually get to like, bring yourself in, like taper yourself, you take a couple of hits, you see how you feel, and just gradually get to the point where you want to be. So, so that's the beauty in using cannabis. It's, we kind of can direct where we're going. But a question I do have for you, and I will I promise I'll be quiet after this. You guys can have the floor.
Nah, you won't. Neither will I.
Jim and I come from the same
Nah.
mentality, I guess is the word to use. Okay, how about the urban legend about chewing peppercorns if you're too high?
Oh, I don't think that works. I mean, that
Okay.
works in theory because it the CB2 receptor, but beta carboxylene. But I've honestly, I just don't think it's a high enough dose.
Okay, so how about the placebo effect though?
What?
Well, I think it's so disgusting chewing peppercorns. Maybe that'll distract you from the fact that you use too much cannabis. But I don't think it actually works physiologically. I think that at some point they're going to come up with an antagonist that you could just take. That if you overconsume, like they had that weight loss drug Ramonavant, that the pharma company theorized that it causes the monkeys. Yeah, so why not just block the CB1 receptor, the cannabinoid receptor, and have weight loss? And the drug did cause weight loss, but they had to pull it off the market because of suicidality and extreme depression. Right. I mean, you can't just completely block the CB1 receptor. Yeah. So it was like a disaster. But I can envision in the future when we understand the endocannabinoid system better, and they're doing a little bit more targeted drug design, that they can come up with a sort of a partial blocker of the cannabinoid receptor that you could sort of take it and sort of not be too high. I think that would be really interesting if they came up with that.
Okay, so how do you feel about, there's a lot of talk about the spiritual connection between cannabis and yoga practice, breath work, all of those, holistic practices that we do. Now, there is one pose in yoga. It's called the butterfly pose, where you put the two soles of your feet together and you kind of you're a butterfly, flap your wings, it's your legs. And that is also used, and I've seen it used, and I've actually offered it to someone who was too high. I've said, put the soles of your feet together and sit there and let the energy transfer through your body. Is that what is that? Is that a placebo effect too? I mean, I'm good with it if it is, that it doesn't matter, but I'm just curious.
I don't think it's a placebo effect. I mean, I think a lot of things go into anxiety and a panic attack. Mm-hmm. And some of it might be too much THC, and some of it might be sort of a feedback loop. Like you get anxious and you get more anxious, and you get more anxious, and then you think you're going to die, and you probably just interrupted the feedback loop. So I don't think it was a placebo at all. And I think it would be great if people knew more techniques like that. I think a lot of the times people end up in the ER, but you could end up if someone knows what they're doing, they can avoid the ER altogether by just providing calm reassurance and just sort of reality check. Nothing terrible is going to happen. If someone has chest pain or their heart rate's 200, then they have to go to the ER. But I think a lot of the time they go to the ER because they just don't know what's happening. And if they had a seasoned friend like you to sort of walk them off the ledge, they'd be fine.
Yeah. I did try it with my grandson when he called me and he said, no, I'm too high. And I told him to do the butterfly pose.
Did it work?
Because I wasn't sure about the peppercorns, and I didn't even
know. No, the peppercorns don't work.
Yeah.
Did it work for your grandson?
He seemed to have calmed down.
Oh, good.
So I don't know.
I think that a strong knock at my front door pretty much sobers me up in about 3 seconds. So if anybody, you could just get a recording of a strong knock at my front door, and that's like a sobriety instant. They could play that anywhere I am, and I'd just be like, "Wing,
the police are here."
So,
I think it depends a little bit on how strong it is. I remember being 15 and going to a Jerry Garcia concert with my cousin Ross. And I probably shouldn't use his name. And he doesn't care. And he always had the best weed. I don't know how or why. And we were leaving the Jerry Garcia concert, and he passed me this teeny little joint, and I just took one puff, and I thought I was going to melt through the fire escape, the little metal middle rungs. And it's really not fun being that high in an environment that's not a comfortable environment. So I think it would have taken more than the butterfly pose to walk me off that ledge, but I survived. Live and learn.
There are some patients with epilepsy that are trying to figure out their terp profile, because there are some terpenes that give them seizures and some that will take them away. I'm trying to figure out my terp profile. Is there an easy way to figure out my terp profile other than just trial and error with every strain that I can get my hands on?
Well, it's trial and error. That's all there is. And, the other problem is the strains aren't necessarily consistent. I guess like the grower really well, or you grow it your own. Sour diesel in San Francisco is totally different from sour diesel in Boston. So it's very difficult for people because there's such an inconsistency of the different strains. That's one of the good things that might come when we get federal legalization is like really good labeling and really good oversight, so that if you buy X, you're getting these terpenes and this amount of THC and this amount of CBG. I think that would really help the medical patients a lot, because as you allude to, it's very difficult to know what you're getting and what works and what doesn't work. And furthermore, with a lot of this stuff, as we talked about earlier, the research is just so in its infancy. We just need to study the stuff. I think it's going to be really amazing what we come up with, but it's going to take years to figure this stuff out.
Yeah, I think
CBD is the one thing that seems like unequivocally good for seizures.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's what they really need is home grow, so they can grow these strains that the dispensaries don't have, or they don't keep them because they're not money makers for them.
No, absolutely. I mean, I think the whole medical cannabis thing would be much better if there was less of an emphasis on like super high THC and much more of an emphasis on some of these other medicinal cannabinoids. Like if you go into a medical dispensary, you should be able to get like 10% THC with like some CBD and some CBG or some CBN in your flower. It shouldn't just be like 30% THC and nothing else in it. It's really unfortunate consequence of prohibition. When cannabis was illegal, the economical thing to do was just to breed up the THC really high, and all the other cannabinoids fell by the wayside. And I think it would all be so much more. The two things that would really help is if it were, the main thing is that if we're better regulated. It's just so different. I mean, each dispensary now in Boston has like their own strains, and they're completely different. And it's impossible to recommend anything for anybody because there's like 1,000 different strains, and they all have the exact same description too. An initial burst of cerebral energy followed by a full body relaxing high, like the exact same description. And the labeling isn't very good. And in Massachusetts, we're pretty organized. We're way ahead of a lot of other states, but the labeling isn't very accurate. So it's really hard for people who don't know a lot about it to manage their care. And it's just as hard for people who do know a lot about it because they don't really have the tools, like the good labeling, the consistent supply. So it's much better than it used to be, obviously, is we now have medical cannabis, like most states, but it's going to get a lot better as we get sort of more coherent. It'd be great if like the doses were standardized for like new patients, right? And stuff like that. It would make it a lot easier for people. Like, someone who has used it their whole life is one thing, but, I see like 80-year-olds that come in and they've never tried it, but they hear from all their friends that it's helping with the aches and pains and with sleep. So they want to try it, but it's much harder to get someone like that started because you can't tell them like, take this many drops, because every tincture has different strengths and different concentrations, and with other medications, you could take 5 milligrams of this. It would be a lot easier if you could say, if they had standardized, for example, the tinctures all had the same amount of THC. So you could just tell them how many drops to take rather than as it is now, they have to do the math themselves. And a lot of people can't really figure that out. So I think it's going to get easier and easier as we get standardization and more consistency with the products. Of course, it's way better than it used to be. So
Peter, what do you feel about, the discussions about moving cannabis out of Schedule 1 federally to Schedule 3?
Well, first of all, cannabis should be descheduled. Like, there's no question. It's like 500,000 people a year die of tobacco. And, it used to be 140,000 people died a year from alcohol. Now it's more like 180,000, and they're like, I just wrote a blog about this. Alcohol is the most dangerous drug of all of them, bar none. And it kills more people than opiates. Opiates last year killed 108,000 people in America, in the United States, and alcohol killed 178,000. It's like, but the opiates get much more airtime. You would never know that like alcohol actually kills a lot more people. And it's just amazing that alcohol and tobacco, the two drugs that kill the most people, are completely descheduled. And cannabis is so, nobody thinks it should be Schedule 1, but turning it to Schedule 3 is just like so incoherent. Like Schedule 3 is like Tylenol with codeine or like anabolic steroids, right? It's like these pretty heavy duty drugs. They're just not like oxycodone, not that heavy duty, but pretty heavy duty. But more than half of Americans live in a state where there's legal recreational cannabis. So, for example, I could just drive 5 minutes down the street and walk into a dispensary and buy some cannabis. So why on earth would I see my doctor and try to get him or her to write me a prescription for a Schedule 3 drug that the pharmacy wouldn't have, that would have a huge copayment, that has all the stigma, when I could just buy it in a dispensary? It's so incoherent. And also it's just less dangerous than the Schedule 3 drugs. So I think it's all, I mean, I don't think anybody would disagree that it's all about like political, like what you can get away with politically. And I don't think Biden, who both Biden and Trump are terrible on cannabis, but you know, Trump's obviously a lot worse, but Biden, I don't think he understands it very well. And I don't think he feels like he can get away with like descheduling it. So like Schedule 3 is like a sort of baby step. But it's funny, he's being held up right now by the DEA. They're the ones who will have to sign up on it. And I don't know, how do the DEA get in charge of drugs? They don't know anything about any of them. It's really awful. So it's still sort of being held hostage by the DEA like it has been for the last 50 years.
Mhm. So rumor has it that nothing will happen for 3 years because everything comes, in threes, and that we won't see anything happen before the election. And I think we all know that.
I don't know if that's true. I think Biden would get a big boost out of it. I think he wants it to happen before the election. I just don't think the DEA is very eager to. It's been such a cash
Right.
cow for them. I don't think they're very eager to reschedule it.
Right. He's got to go up against, I guess, the Department of Justice and all, right?
Well, and also, Peter, I have to point out, we have something really weird here in New Jersey. We have what I've called dual scheduling. So marijuana is still Schedule 1 in New Jersey, and cannabis products are regulated under new descriptions. So there's been a little bit of worry that the DEA might take the same path now that they've gotten this weird recommendation by HHS. But I mean, I agree with you completely. I mean, we need to deschedule cannabis. A bunch of us are going down to lobby Congress and the White House about that next week, actually. But I'm a little worried that in New Jersey, like this weird New Jersey model that we have, where we've got like marijuana with the M in Schedule 1 and cannabis with the C as a regulated product.
It is really weird.
Yeah, I call it quantum cannabis, where we have the same plant existing in different galaxies of the law simultaneously,
Well, it's like
So-
CBD is illegal if it's from the cannabis plant, but it's legal if it
right.
comes from the hemp plant. That's quantum CBD.
Well, and it's a little easier with the CBD because now we're talking about one isolated chemical, cannabidiol. But when you're talking about marijuana with an M and cannabis with a C, we're talking about a huge amount of plants and stuff. It's really away from that one chemical. So anyway, I've gotten a little concerned. The current DEA administrator is a woman named Ann Milgram, and we know who she is because she's the former New Jersey Attorney General. And so that is one of the weird things. I'm worried that our weird New Jersey model is going to set off an idea with the feds here, because I don't like the concept of dual scheduling. I think that it kind of breaks up the whole model of, I mean, scheduling is arbitrary anyway, but the idea of having marijuana and cannabis scheduled differently breaks the whole thing
That
up.
doesn't make any sense. I agree. I mean, and just because you deschedule doesn't mean it has to be a free for all. You still can have like an age limit, and you could have like really good regulations about purity and it just you could focus your effort on the education, not on the sort of the law enforcement component, which just backfires.
The area that I live in, Jersey, I'm in Bergen County, and Bergen County and Hudson County, we kind of like do our own thing. We don't have the same, just as Chris was describing, this dual kind of quantum model that they have in this state. Now, I lived in New York for 20 years in between here, even though I am from here. And when I moved back 6 months ago, I was like, what? you know, to everything, you know, kind of like, but I have to say, you know, living where I live, it's a little bit more lax. I think because of the close proximity. I'm 5 minutes from the George Washington Bridge. So, so there's a lot of anticipation about it too, you know, what's going to happen. You know, I think a lot of the dispensary owners, you know, they have a lot of questions about this, because what happens to them if you know, this scheduling program goes off the wall, and you know, they do put cannabis as a Schedule 3. You know, what's going to happen with the dispensaries? What's going to happen to recreational? You know, and then people are going to grow. You know, people are growing their own. You know, that's just the way it's going to be, you know. And then again, you know, and then the other side of the coin is, and I think Chris can speak to this better than I can, because I'm like, wow, there's no home grow here for medical patients, you know, and that's really wrong. It's just wrong.
No,
Go
it
ahead,
is
Chris,
wrong.
it's all yours.
Yeah, homegrown is so harmless. I mean, I just don't see what the argument is against homegrown. The only people that profit from prohibiting homegrown is like the industry.
Well, they seem to be concerned that patients might not be able to grow it as well. It's all a bunch of crap for sure. You know, one thing I know about people that do know how to grow, they're very proud of it, and they like to share their experiences with others. So if a patient had no idea how to grow, there'd be somebody able to take care of her. I mean, it's not like you got to move in. You know, they just need to know what to do, and you don't have to stop by. It can be a FaceTime. Look at it. Does it look like, you know, whatever. But it's, you know, I belong to a couple of groups about home grow. I'm the only one that doesn't grow in these groups. I just like to see what they come up with, and it's, yeah, patients aren't going to be able to grow as well as people like that, and it's not going to be a matter of money. It's just cannabis has that effect on people sometimes. You know, if they know I could help this person live the life of their dreams by stopping over and helping them do what I love to do, you know, it's going to be a nice, easy fit when that happens. But the reasons for it not happening in New Jersey are just, I don't know how to say it. It's sort of like, it's of Trumpian caliber when somebody tries to explain why it wouldn't work here, because it can be one thing one day, one thing the next. I mean, whatever. And when all else fails, just say, look over there and run, and the conversation's over, you know.
What was the argument against home grow? Because we have homegrown grow in Massachusetts.
Well,
nobody's any problem. The law is you can grow it as long as
well,
you can't see it from the street without binoculars. So
here, there isn't really much of an argument, because the bills in committees that would allow patients and or adults to grow aren't being heard. They've been sitting there for 3 years. So when you can just stop it at the gate, when one person like a Senate president or an assembly speaker can stop it at the gate for 3 years and then simply don't have to explain why. You know, they're hard to corner. They're like, they dart about, you know, you can't catch them.
See, in New York, medical cannabis became accessible in 2014, and recreational didn't until a couple of years ago, 2 or 3 years ago. What they did was, so meanwhile, what they did was they, you know, allowed home grow for the medicinal patient, and you could have like 6 medicinal patients living in one house, okay, but each patient can grow 7 plants. So do 7 times 7, you know, that's a lot of weed. And nobody bothered anybody about it. You know, they really didn't. And it didn't seem to have any effect on, you know, I worked pretty closely with some of the girls from Etain, which was the first medical cannabis dispensary in the part of New York that I lived in. And they don't have any real complaints, you know, about, like, you know, how this is affecting them, because it's not. and they're close to Woodstock. They're in Kingston, so they're right down the road from Woodstock. So they're up there in the Boone Hickey Boons where they can do whatever they want. And there's no, I don't know. It's just really weird.
And also in New Jersey, we were the first state to not have home grow for patients when we passed law. We were 14 states, so 13 all had some form of home grow. We went the other way. Actually, we started to go one way, and then there was a ultimatum compromise behind closed doors. Oh, no home grow.
What was that?
We'll revisit. Yeah,
Jim, let me interrupt you for a minute, though. Sure. What was that?
What was what?
What stopped that from happening?
Well, what happened was in the Senate it passed pretty easy, and then we're waiting for this 2009, and we were waiting for the Assembly to pass deal with it, and the primary sponsor, Senator Nick Scutari, was really pushing the Assembly. Come on, let's get this going quick. We got a guy named John Wilson that's in trouble for growing his own, and if we started that, maybe we get a commutation or something like that. And so it got posted about 3 months after the Senate one, maybe 4, and the chairman of the Health Committee, Assemblyman Herb Conaway, doesn't deserve the first name Herb, by the way. He said there's been some changes made to the Senate version of the bill. I'm going to read them to you now, and this is the bill we're going to pass today. And there was a couple of the people with skin in the game, the legislators, had a couple things to say, but they could only say so much. And that was it. It was an ultimatum / compromise where the choice was in the Senate, we get some patients off the battlefield now and come back later. Otherwise, it was going to start all over again the next session. But for the next 15 years, nobody ever really got an explanation at whose request was this or insistence that it be taken out. It wasn't the head of the committee decided, I think I'm going to just take it out, and not explain why ever. So there was never an explanation. And I stand a little bit outside most people that say, wow, we don't really know. We got some good guesses. And that's not good enough. If somebody doesn't want to tell me something why like that, that's good enough for me to want to know why. That in and of itself. So that's a whole nother story, though, right?
I can't imagine the police make that a high priority.
No, they don't. They don't.
It's like you could just buy it in a dispensary. Why would they bother busting people?
But we're going to start, hopefully, approaching it the simpler way and say, look, we have all this technology now that we use since the pandemic. We don't need to go to other states and confer with people to see how it's working in their state. If we're the only state that doesn't allow patients home grow, that allows others, adults, to possess, and we're an outlier state, we should either start looking to those states for what's going wrong there or what's going right, but we don't. Or if you can't validate, what have we been saved from here by having no home grow? What's happening in other states? It's not happening. But that doesn't happen. Oh yeah, try getting legislators on a meeting like this. That's not going to happen. Because they're going to get.
The only thing I can think of is they don't get any tax revenue if you grow it on your own. And say you think cannabis is really bad, and you think you need a ton of tax revenue to like treat addiction and whatever, all the other things people used to think about cannabis, and a lot of people still do. I can imagine that like they'd want the tax revenue, but aside from that, there's no good argument against.
There's no for patients. There is no tax revenue here. The patients, there's no slice of the pie. My feeling is that it's more about, well, we can get a lot of money into the treasury without letting adults, consumers, grow their own. And if we start dealing with patients, then they're going to start beating on my door again. What about us for adults? So I think it's sort of like keep the patients and the adults in the same wide net, muddy the waters whenever you talk about home grow. Don't be specific if it's for adults or patients, and then patients get the short end of the stick again, and then there's collateral damage, and it's maddening, especially you having an experience within your family that I had within mine, seeing how it worked, and then being told all this other stuff. Yeah, it's. I can't just shake it that there's so much pain because of something that could so simply be stopped. It just blows me away. So, yeah, but we don't play things the way anybody else does here in New Jersey, and sometimes it's for good things. New Jersey was, Chris, am I correct in saying the first state to allow cannabis on school grounds?
Really?
Yeah, we
oddly enough, we allowed cannabis on school grounds in a very weird way. I mean, you could,
but
as a
the first state,
come in, yeah, and it was a very restrictive version to accommodate parents and kids in schools. But even at that time, again, when we were talking about the reasons behind home grow, Peter, let me tell you the reasons I've heard against home grow. The big reason is that the Senate president here in New Jersey says the industry needs to get off the ground. I'm not kidding you. The other thing, like, they've been around for 10 years. Curaleaf's first dispensary opened in New Jersey, okay? Like, these guys have been around. I think they're off the ground. The other argument I've heard over the years is that, oh my gosh, Chris, if we legalize home grow, do you see that apartment building right there? And there's thousands of people there. They'll all be growing. It will catch fire. All those lights, it go up in flames like Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Everybody's going to plug their hairdryer in at once, So that's another argument we've heard. And I'm serious. That's an argument. And then finally is the insurance industry, again, the apartment building and our high density sort of cities in New Jersey. They're like, well, if we legalize home grow, most people can't do it because they don't actually own their home. So what are you going to do about all the people who are renting and leasing and things like that? I do point out that Washington, D.C. has had home grows for 11 years now, and the nation's capital hasn't fallen down. In fact, you can buy a $500,000 condo with a grow room built in right in the Beltway now. So,
really?
I swear.
I have to tell my brother that he lives in DC. So.
You should. You should. So, but if you're asking what the arguments are, those are the arguments that they've been selling us. Quite frankly,
I think the arguments are coming from industry. I mean, I remember one argument, just to add to that, is that, like, I remember an industry group was trying to argue that law enforcement wouldn't be able to tell if it was hemp or cannabis, and that would be very confusing. So therefore, we shouldn't have home grow. That was another one.
Well, don't worry. In New Jersey here, Peter, the good news is that the cops are fighting for their right to party. So that the police department in Jersey City is actually fighting for their right to use cannabis off duty right now because the city doesn't want to let them. Police in New Jersey were largely allowed to use cannabis. So they were like our worst opponents during the legalization process. And now they're fighting for the right to party. I kind of pinch me. I'm glad that this has turned around in this way.
If you can't beat them, join them, right? So, it's sort of like all the alcohol companies that were so against cannabis legalization. Now they're all, coming up with cannabis drinks.
Well, Lefty's been wearing him down with podcasts at the State House for going on 10 years now, a couple of hundred over that time period. So legislators from their committee room windows can look out and see the signage and the people gathering. And where at first it was patients having to go across the street to smoke because that would be Trenton property, on the other side of the street was state property. So from that to now, just adults freely gathering and consuming, and and it's not like everybody's standing in circles passing joy. It's as commonplace as could be. So Lefty's been spending his time desensitizing people there. And
let me tell you, I was in DC recently, and I was doing an interview on CBS in Lafayette Park, right across from the White House. And they asked, "Well, Chris, what do you think that the future of marijuana at the White House is going to be?" And I turned around and I was like, "The future is marijuana growing at the White House. That's the future."
My dad actually brought marijuana into the White House. I think in the 1980s, he accidentally did it, but it was in the
Accidentally.
must have been the
Who hasn't done that?
I think that the next time I go, I'm definitely bringing not one but two joints, just in case. I think that the next time I go to the White House, since they let me in the first time, I figure the second time I can bring the joints.
The other thing you're talking about, policemen, like police, they are so burnt out and have so much stress in their job. It would be, and a lot of them drink a ton. Like it would be so much better if they use for them if they use cannabis. And like, there's no reason they can't use it when they're off duty. It just seems very punitive, especially like medical patients. Like if you're a policeman, a fireman, why can't you use in your off duty? Obviously not before work, but if it's the weekend and you have some back pain or I don't know, you can't sleep. It's so much healthier than many of the pharmaceuticals and the alcohol that they are allowed to use. It just seems like such a arbitrary line in the sand they draw for these professionals.
We have a problem.
I mean, I don't know, Peter. I think that maybe a little bit of cannabis at work might be okay for the cops. Those things that hold the shotgun in the front seat. If we could replace that with a 4-foot bong, and when they're having a bad day, and they could just take that out of the holster right there and hit the bong, and we'd have a better cop on the street. I think that might be okay.
You definitely have a friend of your cop.
Indeed. So, also too, I wanted to ask, like,
thank you. The donut consumption, though.
That's my.
That would get really dangerous.
So I wanted to ask too, like, you're in academia, and I have to say that there's a certain politics to academia. Are you feeling? We talked about that with your dad too, but like, are you feeling that shift on your end of things? Are you feeling that, like, because that's important to us? You talk about the research not being there, know.
First of all, Henry Kissinger said about, he was an evil man, but he had a couple good quotes. He said about academic politics is that the reason academic politics are so vicious is because the people are fighting about so very little. I thought that was a really good quote.
I like that.
And the politics around cannabis, it's just, for me, it's just a little bit weird. My theory is that what a particular doctor thinks about cannabis depends on like their vantage point. Like on the one extreme is like the oncologists who, see their patients really benefiting drastically with chemotherapy, nausea, weight loss, pain. And like 90% of oncologists are in favor of medical marijuana. And on the other extreme are like the, adolescent psychiatrists who see the rare, but really tragic cases of like cannabis being the cause or one cause. The kid smokes a lot and then has a psychotic episode, and they tend to overgeneralize and thinks that's what happens all the time with cannabis. But it is really tragic when it does happen. And most of them are really against it. And I think the politics really comes from sort of the fact that, I counsel patients and certify them for medical cannabis. And then the addiction psychiatrist thinks that any cannabis use is like cannabis addiction. So like, it's just like very confusing for the patients. They get these like very, very different messages. And different institutions, I think overall everybody's lightening up about cannabis. But for example, at the Cleveland Clinic in Ohio, none of the doctors are allowed to prescribe or certify cannabis for their patients, even though medical cannabis has been legal for a long time in Ohio, and now recreational cannabis is going to be legal, but none of the doctors are allowed to. I mean, if I worked there, I'd literally tell them to take a hike and just do it anyways, because it's such a regressive policy. But, at my hospital at Harvard, they sort of had a don't ask, don't tell. Like they never paid me or encouraged me to do it, even though my patients always did really well, but they never bugged me about it. And I thought that was kind of a win, because given what a lot of other doctors are going through. But overall, the pendulum's really shifting in favor, meaning that the people who are against it are like less against it if you watch really closely what they say and do, because if they stay like steadfastly in the like reefer madness zone, nobody listens to them anymore. They don't get, the press doesn't call them to comment if they say really, draconian things. So like the whole pendulum swinging with the pro people and the anti people and the people in the middle all swinging a little bit more pro. And I think as people get more lived experience with it, they're just sort of more inoculated from a lot of the more, histrionic of the claims against it. But at the same time, it's like any other medication. It works for some people. It doesn't work for other people. Some people have a bad reaction to it. I have some patients that can't use it at all. Even one puff, they get really, really anxious, even though they have chronic pain and they love to use it for chronic pain. We don't know if it's safe in pregnancy. And, it really might be very bad for teenagers. So, it's not like a panacea, and it's not like a dangerous drug, like a really, really dangerous drug, like, methamphetamine. And I don't get why people have to be on like one side or the other. I just think there's a lot of common ground. I don't see why we all can't agree that it helps people with pain, anxiety, and insomnia, and that it is not good for teenagers. Granted, make it illegal. You don't put kids in like juvie or rehab for experimenting with it. But, I just think, if someone has a strong history of psychosis, you want to be careful. And I just think there's a lot of common ground. And I just think it's been such a polemical issue that people don't realize that there's a lot that they do agree on in this issue. And I think that, doctors could now about 2/3 of doctors are in favor of medical marijuana, but I think that number grows every year. So I think we're getting there. That's what I really try to do in my book, Seeing Through the Smoke, is sort of argue it from both sides and then go into the data and say what's actually true to the extent that we know what's true and what's not true. I mean, it's very difficult with pregnancy because, you can't just take 1,000 women and give them tons of any drug and then take 1,000 and give them placebo and see if they have birth defects. Like, you just can't do that. It's not ethical. So we don't really know about pregnancy. And there are some concerning studies that show, low birth weight, this and that. But then you read the fine print and, these are like poor people that have crappy lives that use a lot more cannabis or don't have good prenatal care. And if you take out the like poverty and the other drugs and the tobacco, we just don't know. There's a lot we don't know. So I'm looking forward to having a lot of these questions answered, but we don't know exactly when that's going to be either. So,
Peter, I can tell you this, that I am a living, walking, I don't even know what the right word is for it, but I smoked weed when I was pregnant. I was a teenager. I had 2 kids. We didn't think that there was anything wrong with weed. So it was, you weren't supposed to drink, and I didn't drink anyway. So it really didn't matter to me, but I smoked weed the whole time I was pregnant. And I knew so many different, of my friends that did, and what have you. So I don't know where that is going, but there was something I wanted to ask you.
Well, the problem with pregnancy is nothing's really safe in pregnancy. Mm-hmm. So, ibuprofen isn't safe in pregnancy. I mean, what are you going to do if someone's in pain? You don't want to give them opiates in pregnancy, and even Tylenol is not particularly safe in pregnancy.
Right.
So it would be really, really helpful if we knew how safe or unsafe cannabis was in pregnancy. On the one hand, it's really effective for pain and for morning sickness. So people are using it. The rates in pregnancy are going up and up and up. But it's just, because I tend to be very cautious with anything in pregnancy, but you also can't ignore the patient's symptoms. So, and with cannabis, the whole point is to use like the least toxic alternative. Mm-hmm. And it's just very hard to know what that is if we don't really know how dangerous it is.
Yeah.
I think a decade or 12 years ago, somebody was telling me, well, it's only 14% of medical schools teach anything about the endocannabinoid system. Is that getting any better? I mean, I
can only imagine it's getting a little bit better. There was a study actually from about the year like 2013 where 13% of medical schools were teaching the endocannabinoid system. And
that should be much more than that by now, though, shouldn't it? I mean,
even if you're anti-cannabis, you need to know the endocannabinoid system so you know why it's harmful. Or
right.
The endocannabinoid system controls so many different things. So I think that's got to be getting a little bit better. I still don't think they're doing a good job teaching about medical marijuana. A more recent study came out and said that like 10% of medical school graduates and 10% of residents felt competent to discuss medical marijuana with their patients. I mean, that's
which means 90% aren't. And, it seems like I don't know. Is that going to be as slow as everything that we have to do in New Jersey here? Are we going to fight to get up to 20%
Well, you know
by
what the problem is, though?
2030?
The problem is, like,
I don't.
I work for a group, Doctors for Drug Policy Reform, and they used to be Doctors for Cannabis Regulation. Yeah, David Nathan, who's from New Jersey, is the founder of it, and they were talking about coming up with cannabis competencies for doctors. But the point I was making is, like, how can you come up with a competency if there's no common ground? Like, you talk to the oncologist, it helps with nausea and chemotherapy. You talk to the pro-cannabis doctors, it helps with pain, anxiety, and sleep. You talk to the psychiatrists, and they recently came out with a paper that said it shouldn't be used for any psychiatric condition, including PTSD, anxiety, and depression, because it makes all of those much worse. So it's just very hard to come up with a competency or common ground if there's such intense disagreement about it. So it makes it really difficult.
You just reminded me of a question I did want to ask you. And what do you feel about this cannabis use disorder, the DSM criteria that is being explored? Do you have any opinion?
I have a lot of thoughts on that. I do think cannabis can be addictive. Absolutely. I've seen it. I've seen people get addicted to it. I've helped people with cannabis addiction. Something I consult on, and I think I'm pretty good at it because it's complicated a lot of the time, because cannabis often does some things to help people, but then some people lose control of it and then end up like smoking it all the time, and then it doesn't do anything except make them miserable. So I definitely think it can be addictive. Now, that said, I'm someone who's 19 years in recovery from opiate addiction, and I've helped a lot of people with opiate addiction as well. It's one of the things I treat. And people aren't like robbing pharmacies or like breaking bones to get cannabis like they do with opiates. Like, it's definitely the quality of the addiction is not nearly as deadly, obviously, and not nearly as severe, but it can cause a lot of misery and sort of lost jobs and lost educational opportunities. So I think cannabis can be addictive. The problem is the way the psychiatrists have defined it, it's like vastly exaggerated. Like, they contend that like a third of adult users have cannabis use disorder, which is like utterly ridiculous. Not even close. I would guess it's like 3 to 5% of users probably get into trouble with it. I mean, cannabis causes euphoria. Some people get addicted to the euphoria, and teenagers tend to get addicted to it more than adults do, because when they're bored, they're angry, they're lonely, they're pissed off, they just reach in and take a puff off their vape instead of learning how to self-soothe. So I do think that teenagers can get addicted to it more than adults can. But the fact is, to get a definition of cannabis use disorder or cannabis addiction, you need to satisfy 2 out of 11 criteria, one of which is tolerance and one of which is withdrawal. And like, all the medical cannabis users obviously have tolerance and withdrawal. Yeah, so do the people who use medicinal benzodiazepines or medicinal opiates. And we don't use tolerance or withdrawal to define addiction in those populations, because everybody who uses them has tolerance and withdrawal. Why would you give everybody an addiction? You actually harm someone when you give them a diagnosis of addiction and they don't have an addiction. They don't get as many pain medications from their doctors or sleep medications. And the way we define it by including tolerance and withdrawal, all it does is rope in all the medical cannabis patients, many of whom, if not most of whom, are doing really, really well, but they fall under the broad definition from the psychiatrists of like cannabis use disorder. So I think we need to, I talk a lot about this in my book. I have a whole chapter on it about how we could redefine cannabis addiction, where we won't end up giving tons of people a diagnosis of addiction who don't have it, but we actually can identify and help the people who do have addiction and who need help. I mean, the other thing is the rates have been that inflated the rates of like cannabis addiction is that, like, kids would get busted with cannabis and then they go to court and then the judge would be like, do you want to, go to juvie or do you want to go to rehab? And the parents would be like, rehab. So of course they got called cannabis addiction, but they didn't really have cannabis addiction. They got busted using cannabis, not cannabis. They're totally different things. So I think cannabis can be addictive, and the addiction can be serious and needs to be treated with empathy and compassion. But I think the rates of cannabis addiction have been vastly exaggerated by these like drug war hangover definitions that rope in all the medical cannabis patients. So I think we really, really need to revamp our definition of cannabis.
Kind of withdrawal
it's cool here in Philly, by the way. Oh,
I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, in Philly, we flipped the script on that, Peter. So the district attorney in Philadelphia, using our decrim policy along with the courts, they stopped referring anybody who was arrested for possession into drug treatment. And all of a sudden, NIDA noticed that the treatment rate for marijuana in Philadelphia went down by 85% in 2 years. And so NIDA has this thing called the NDUS, the National Drug Early Warning System, and they study 13 cities for different markers of addiction. And so they track everybody who comes into treatment in Philadelphia and 13 other cities. And of course, marijuana was driven. In fact, we were treating more people for marijuana in Philadelphia than we were for heroin and other opiates. So all of a sudden, we flipped that script, and now the treatment resource goes to people with opiates and alcohol. And there's been this 85% reduction in treatment. So you're absolutely right. It was an arbitrary part of the process. People were not dependent on cannabis. They were trying to get out of their criminal justice situation. And it was a real waste of our addiction treatment resource in that regard. But you can flip the script on that. We've done it in Philly, and you can do it in other places, hopefully.
Well, and the rehab industry is like a $50 billion industry. I don't even think rehab works for anything personally, having been through it. I don't think it helps anybody. I think there are much better ways to treat addiction. I think it's this big scam from beginning to end. And very few of them use Suboxone and methadone. They just, use like the 12 steps, which were created 100 years ago, which helps some people, but for most people, they're just very alienating and not that helpful. But the rehab industry was such a profound financial backer of all the state by state, on the anti side of all the state by state legalization initiatives, because they didn't want to lose that cash cow. I mean, they're like law enforcement and rehab are the two biggest contributors to all the anti-cannabis nonsense we have in this country, because it's such a cash cow for both of them.
Peter,
and there's a political corruption side there too. Sorry, it's just that the rehab industry is very tied to the politicians. There was a politician in New Jersey named Mary Pat Angelini who basically ran one of those cash cow programs where anybody caught with drugs had to go through her program to get back into the world. And as a state legislator, she was able to drive a lot of funds her direction. So you're right. That industry is, when you talk about the treatment industry, it comes with its own politics. And they have their own lobbyists and they have their own politicians, and they keep a very entrenched system in place. It's very pernicious. You really have to work it out of the system here.
Body brokers. Peter, I have an issue. I have multiple back surgeries. I was on opiates for 10 years. I have an artificial disc, L4, L5, a fusion, L5S1, and they had me on 90 milligrams of roxicodone every 3 hours. It's an incredible amount. So I had to wean off all that using cannabis. I was able to use cannabis and get off all those pills. I had a 2-level cervical surgery a couple of years ago, and I didn't want to go back on opiates. So I was very afraid. So my friend went to Maine and got a bunch of suppositories and a bunch of edibles for me. And I had this 2-level cervical, and the suppositories seemed to work to keep me off the opiates for this 2-level cervical. I took 0 opiates for this 2-level
That
cervical.
is amazing, because that really hurts.
Yeah. I was amazed myself. I couldn't believe it.
I mean, I tend to think that after surgery, people usually need opiates. I mean, I had spine surgery. I can't even imagine going through that without opiates. But then, after 3 or 4 days, it hurts less, and you could transition to medical cannabis. And I think they work really well together. I just think people are like either in the opiate camp or the cannabis camp. But I actually think you could use them together and have much lower dose of opiates.
Oh, there's a synergistic effect. Absolutely.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Right.
And when I had a fairly catastrophic injury from a fall, confined to my feet, because I came down laterally from a ladder, but vertically, and my feet like there was like a crumple zone or whatever you call it, where nothing else got hurt. But it was at a level of pain that I didn't know existed, to where I couldn't even breathe. I couldn't relax my muscles enough to breathe, and I'd pass out in pain. I don't know. I guess it was from lack of oxygen. And breathe. I can't. And I was there 4 stays of 8, 10, 12, and 29 days over 4 months, so 59 days and long nights there. But on the way back, took a little mercy on me and said, "Well, normally, we give you a Dilaudid, but when we're releasing you, there's some time constraints. We don't give it to you on your way out exactly." But they pushed the limits, and combined with just taking a couple of tokes before I was even in the car, having to slide myself in because both feet were totally operated on. Oh man. It was the first time that I relaxed in 8 days, and it wasn't from smoking a whole joint. I took maybe 2 tokes, and my friend is a little rambunctious, and he just shoved it in my mouth while he was getting me in the car and helping me slide in. And by the time we got out to the road, I wasn't pain free, but it was such a low level. It made me want to cry with pure joy. And then I realized I wanted one of them 7-Eleven big hot dogs. There's a 7-Eleven right here. And I went through a whole thing, and it astounded me. And then, I had a gallbladder surgery, and I just it was like a 5 milligram Percocet and a couple of tokes, and this pain went away. But it wasn't I'd take the Percocet and added to it. The synergistic effect blew me away, that I really did not need much of either. And if I had just one or the other, I'd need a way greater amount. So,
Well, they've proven that. They've actually done studies and proven that with co-administering cannabis and opiates, you could lower the opiate dose by like up to 80% because they work on very similar receptors. And given that most of the mischief you get into with opiates is dose related, that's a really huge thing. I mean, they do studies where they give, in the lab, they do things that cause pain, like put your hand in hot water and stuff. And people, volunteer for this stuff. And they give you like 2.5 milligrams of oxycodone, and it doesn't affect your pain. And they give you like 2.5 milligrams of THC, and it doesn't affect your pain. But they give you 2.5 milligrams of THC and 2.5 milligrams of oxycodone, and that's enough to really affect your pain. So they've proven really pretty thoroughly that there is a synergistic effect. And I think that that's one of the ways in which cannabis can really help alleviate the opiate crisis. I mean, using it instead of opiates, using lower doses of opiates, using for opiate withdrawal. I think if someone's like really addicted to opiates, you want to use Suboxone or methadone rather than trying cannabis, because there's this good evidence that Suboxone or methadone have an 50 to 80% reduction in overdose or deaths. And, I would feel like it would make more sense to give Suboxone for the opiate addiction and then give cannabis for the withdrawal symptoms. And they work well together in that sense. But really for chronic pain, you have a lot of these patients that were started on huge doses of opiates. And now they're just like stuck on them. And I always offer patients, do you want to taper off trying to use cannabis? Some aren't interested at all. And others have had a lot of success with either getting them completely off opiates or getting them on a much lower dose. And it's just a win for everybody. I mean, I think cannabis is really good for like mild to moderate pain. But if you have like really, really severe pain, I think you often, like right after surgery, most people need opiates. But for the mild to moderate pain, there's really no reason to be on opiates if you could use cannabis.
I think there was residual effect from the anesthesia, because I was amazed at all the drugs that are in anesthesia. There's like 10 different drugs.
Yeah, the average surgery has like 11 different drugs. It's really amazing.
Why do they put so many drugs in there like that? Do they have to everybody has to get their beak wet? Like everybody has to get paid?
No, I think it's just the one anesthesiologist getting his or her beak wet. But I think it's just complicated. The blood pressure goes up, the blood pressure goes down, the oxygen goes down, the patient starts to wake up. So you need a sedative. You don't want them to be in pain. So you have to give them something for pain. Then the heart rate is too low or the breathing starts to slow. So you have to give less of that and give more of something else. I do think anesthesia is really, really complicated. And
it is, and the worst thing that you would want, especially if you're a surgeon, is to have your patient wake up in the middle of a surgery.
Oh God, that would be a disaster.
My husband is a surgeon.
But the anesthesiologist the anesthesiologist I found during my hospital stay when I broke my leg, they were always the happiest person around. Like they were always the most upbeat person in the room. Like everybody else was super serious and focused. Anesthesiologist walks in, they got a couple of jokes for everybody. they're in a hot mood. I always wanted to be on whatever they were on.
Well, you know what? Be careful what you ask for, because one of my other specialties is physician health and addiction in physicians, and anesthesiologists have by far the highest rate of addiction.
Yeah,
and not only that, they have a really hard time getting over their addictions. And when they relapse, they end up like overdosing in a closet. I know 2 anesthesiologists that died lonely deaths in like a closet somewhere in the hospital. So it is serious occupational hazard, the stress, and then the access to all these drugs.
Well, to take it
I
back
have to say though, I was
Here.
terrified of my general anesthesia because I had never gone through it, and I had to have these surgeries. But the anesthesiologists really were the nicest people that day. So I have to. There's something about that.
They're very nice people. They're absolutely very nice people. But I think it is a pretty stressful job. So.
Well, to take it back a little bit, I had woken up in the middle of my surgery that I had on my foot. I had supposedly supposed to be 2 toes removed, and I woke up in the middle of the surgery, and the anesthesiologist told the doctor like he's awake, and the doctor was like, oh, okay. And basically they came back around to speak to me because he pretty much had a question, should I keep the last 2 toes that were there, or should I take them? In the middle of that, devastation, like, wait, what do you mean you had to take that many? Because you didn't know. So I'm like, you know what? And then at the end of it, I was like, all right, go ahead, take them all, forget it. So I ain't got to come back, just be done with it. And basically the anesthesiologist asked me, do you want to go back to sleep or do you want to stay awake? And I was like, well, I'm up now, so you might as well leave me. So I basically heard everything after that.
Yeah,
wow, that sounds really traumatic.
No,
I wanted to sleep.
I was actually, in good spirits, if you want to be technical, only because I knew what I was going in there for, and for lack of better things, I knew God knew what He was doing, so I just let it be.
I woke up during mine also. I had a scope going down to my stomach taking pictures, and I woke up during that, and I started pulling the tube out of my mouth, and they had to give me more of whatever they had to give me to put me back to sleep. That's because I was a heavy cannabis user when I had that done to me, I guess.
Well, that is a really good argument for good doctor-patient communication about cannabis use, which has been sorely lacking in the past. I mean, the anesthesia requirements are higher, which is not a big deal if the anesthesiologist knows about it. They just give you a little more anesthesia. But if they don't know about it, that's exactly what can happen.
Wow.
Well, I wasn't a cannabis user at the time.
Oh, okay. So you weren't, but
at all. And I didn't use anything.
Okay.
Wow.
I didn't even drink.
Yeah, I did. So that's crazy though.
So
Man.
Is that like anybody who smokes marijuana is like a redhead when they come to anesthesia? Like they have to have a little extra or what?
Basically,
yeah. If you smoke it every day, you do need more anesthesia.
Yeah.
But again,
so
the only
smoking marijuana makes you a redhead. You're telling me that smoking marijuana makes you a ginger when it comes to anesthesia. That's very interesting.
Pretty much. So it's all about doctor-patient communication. That's the important thing. But a lot of doctors just aren't comfortable talking about it because
they need to know more about this in medical school. I'm getting right back to it. Then it's got to start there.
It also has to do with personal relationships, because I think you'd be surprised how much most physicians do know about cannabis, but are reluctant to talk about it. And once you're a patient for a while, you develop that relationship with your physician. I mean, I was run over by a car, so I was under anesthesia for I think 8 hours for my broken neck. And but they knew, but he knew because he was my friend. He was somebody I knew, somebody I worked with, and someone that I was honest with. So yeah, it's got to do, patient education has to fall into there.
It's good for people who are cannabis consumers to
To know
know
that, right?
to know that,
Yeah.
because when I had a dozen operations, but at one point I think it was 5 every 4 days because there was infection, and you had to keep opening it up and scraping out a DNR. So I forget what they call it. And I was a regular cannabis consumer, of course, not there in the hospital because I couldn't. But I would have been a more forward about it. They knew from the beginning that I was a cannabis consumer because the advocacy in me, and I'm in a hospital. This is where I advocate doctors, and I try to educate. And actually, I did get to educate the guy that worked on me. He had a little flock of little med students following him in, and I was the subject, and I liked it, but it was an opportunity. At one point, I was feeling like I'm a little nauseous because I was nauseous a lot. I guess I was fine with them giving me opiates, and they made me feel a little nauseous. So I was being a little sarcastic. I could feel it coming. I said, "Oh, by the way, I guess I got to thank you for giving me the second best antiemetic to keep my nausea at bay, Zofran." And of course, when I say the second best, they're going to ask, "Well, what would be the first?" And I said, "Well, marijuana," And so they say, "Well, how's the Zofran working?" And it was like right on cue. And I don't vomit nicely, but I had my bucket there, and when he asked me how it was working, I let loose, and it was the first time in my life I ever didn't audibleize while vomiting. I can't help that; it just comes out. And it was almost like a magic trick, and you could see his eyes were kind of like, wow, he wasn't quite sure what happened. And behind him, they were almost elbowing each other and like look at that. But it was and of course my late wife Cheryl, she just wore I'm a medical marijuana patient, not a criminal. She had different shirts and things, and medical marijuana user. I never liked that user word, and it started a lot of conversations, And there was always that one. There was I don't know if it was a nurse or what, but serving the purpose of one, and she looked at Cheryl and said, I don't know how she knew she would have children or anything. So what would your children say about that or something, and she had already 2 children predecease her, died, and it was the exact wrong thing to say. So basically, it comes with the territory. But then I refused refused to have her have anything to do with Cheryl, just stay away, somebody else. But that same person had to come and close the curtains to deal with the person next to Cheryl. And I'd talk about her, and Cheryl would be like, "She can hear you." Yeah, I know, she can hear me.
Oh,
So I get to talk with Cheryl about, like, we were talking about what she needed to hear, and not being mean about it. So, well, I'm sure she doesn't know. And then I'd say what she wouldn't know. And Cheryl would, well, it's not her fault because she was that kind of person. So, advocacy never stops with me. I can't help it. Sometimes it doesn't work, though. There's a lot of strong feelings in the other direction from people, clinicians, and they don't know. I mean, it's not their fault in my estimation, though. That's why they should be taught that in medical school. I want that up to 18% in the next 5 years. 18% of medical schools. Got to set goals.
Well, you wonder. I mean, the next battlefront's going to be allowing people to use it in the hospital, because it just doesn't help if they're withdrawing in the hospital if they use it every day at home, and it also can help with pain, and it's hard to sleep in the hospital. It can help with that too. But you wonder if, I just thought about this the first time, if rescheduling to schedule through will make it so that the hospitals aren't so worried about losing federal funding if people use
Yeah.
cannabis in the hospital.
That would be
Yeah, that makes
wonderful.
sense.
That would
I
be
know. I
wonderful.
thought about that also. But I do want to ask you another question about going back to cannabis use disorder, because I still can't wrap my head around any of that. What kind of withdrawal symptoms are we talking about
Oh, well, yeah.
to
Well,
be able to make that kind of diagnosis?
yeah, think of it this way. Wait, hang on one sec. I just lost you for a sec. What did I just do? You wouldn't. I just pressed like the wrong button. I'll find you. But anyways, cannabis withdrawal. Think of it this way: it's like we have this natural endocannabinoid system, right? And that's always modulating so many different things in our body, like it's modulating like hunger, memory, learning, appetite, reproduction, temperature. And with these natural endocannabinoids that are fitting into the cannabinoid receptors, you never use cannabis, you still have like this really complicated system maintaining all these things run by the cannabinoids. Now, if you use cannabis very, very heavily, your cannabis receptors downregulate, they become sparse. So that's why you get tolerance. You need more and more because you have fewer receptors. It's like an arms race. You have to smoke more, you have fewer receptors. You need to use more to get the same effect because the receptors get thinned out. So then say you smoke every day for a couple years, then you stop. Then you're stuck with a situation where you have very few cannabinoid receptors and your natural endocannabinoids don't have nearly as much receptors to work with. So you can get sort of the opposite of what cannabis tends to help people with. People get grumpy, they have trouble eating, poor appetite, they have trouble sleeping, just for a week or two. Because the thing about the cannabinoid receptors is that they upregulate if they're not suppressed by like a lot of THC. So it's a really temporary thing, the withdrawal. And it's not fatal. Nobody dies from it, but it can be pretty miserable. And some people want to stop or have to stop smoking cannabis for different reasons: a new job, international travel, they're drug tested. And this kind of withdrawal can make it really, really difficult to stop. So it's always better to like taper down than to try to go cold turkey. It can be very uncomfortable for people.
Peter, is it the same for CBD?
No, because CBD works on like a million different receptors, and CBD doesn't really directly affect the cannabinoid receptors as much. It sort of indirectly prevents the metabolism of like anandamides. You have higher anandamide levels, but it doesn't. CBD doesn't directly affect the cannabinoid. If anything, it's a little bit of a antagonist. So CBD does not cause withdrawal, but definitely people can get withdrawal from like daily heavy cannabis use. But again, to go back to what we said earlier about cannabis addiction, that's not addiction. To have withdrawal from a drug doesn't mean you're addicted to it. People have really severe withdrawal from their SSRIs, but we don't consider them addicted to their SSRIs. It's just they have withdrawal from it because that's what the medicine does.
Is there any interaction with the SSRIs and cannabis that you've seen?
Nothing that I've seen. People say there can be a drug interaction, but I think with CBD, it's more likely than with cannabis as a whole. CBD works like grapefruit juice. It inhibits the liver enzymes, competes for them. So it can raise the level of other drugs in your body. Now, that's more important if it's like a blood thinner, an anti-epileptic, and immunosuppressant, things that have to be within a narrow therapeutic window, where they're SSRIs. So you're on like, 51 milligrams of Zoloft instead of 50. It's not like the end of the world. If anything, I've seen the opposite. I've seen people starting cannabis and then not really feeling like they need their SSRI anymore. I always encourage people to taper down their SSRI, not to like stop it cold turkey just so they don't get withdrawal. But a lot of times people have found that with cannabis, they don't even need their SSRI anymore, especially if they're taking it for anxiety, because it does the same purpose. It helps with anxiety.
So if people say someone is coming off SSRIs because, they want to, because after a number of years, you want to come off of them. Is cannabis effective in helping them come off of something like Zoloft?
Yeah, for some people. It depends what they're on the Zoloft for. If it's for anxiety, cannabis, for most people, helps with anxiety, but for some people can make them very anxious.
So would it depend on the dosage that they're on?
Yeah. I was just going to say the dose is really important too. Everybody's different, but generally speaking, low doses of cannabis make anxiety better, and high doses can make it a lot worse. But yeah, really everybody's different. And but it just, you know, the main reason people use cannabis is chronic pain, but after that, anxiety is a close second. And anxiety is a huge reason why so many people are on SSRIs. And I don't think SSRIs are particularly dangerous, but you know, I just think it's kind of funny how, like, you know, the medical community thinks SSRI is good, cannabis bad, and it's like, I think they're about equally effective.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not healthy to smoke anything. I mean, in truth, like doctors don't recommend smoking, but we recommend a tincture or an edible or something like that. Or maybe use a dry herb vaporizer if you really need to inhale it.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Yeah. I'm getting a little sleepy here because I'm still in Helsinki time is my problem. I was in Helsinki last week.
Helsinki time. Isn't that a song? Helsinki time?
My wife wanted to photograph Siberian squirrels, so we were in Helsinki. It's a pretty cool place, to be honest.
Did you take a lot of pictures?
She did. She took hundreds of pictures. Yeah.
You should post them. I'd love to see them.
Yeah, and I met with some of the cannabis people over there. It was really fun. They don't have medical yet. They have a little bit of medical, but attitudes are changing very much from against towards in favor.
So
that's happening everywhere else.
So are we a little bit more advanced in attitudes here than what you've seen
Well,
over
we're
there?
more advanced about cannabis than Finland. In every other regard, Finland's way more advanced than we are. Believe me, they have like universal health care. They don't have homelessness. They take care of everybody. They have low crime, humane prisons, free education. They're way ahead of us. But in terms of drug policy, ironically, we're sort of ahead of them.
It is ironic.
What do you think about what's going on in Oregon right now? You know, with
that's very complicated.
From decriminalizing to recriminalizing.
Yeah.
That's like an oxymoron.
Yeah, I think they're pulling the plug a little bit too early on the experiment with decriminalization. I mean, I think the rates of overdoses have gone up everywhere, not just in Oregon.
Yeah.
They've gone up in other states comparably. And I think what they did wrong in Oregon is, first of all, it's hard to decriminalize in one area and keep it criminalized everywhere else, because then everybody just goes to that area. It's like a drug festival. And then, but if you do it everywhere, there's no incentive for all the, you know, people with like really serious drug issues to go to that one place. Number two, it's supposed to be linked with like, ideally with like healthcare and jobs training and addiction treatment. And provide housing for people, and they didn't do any of that stuff. So you just like the drug issue is not separate from all these other issues. They're like two sides of the same coin. And you look at what Portugal did, and at least originally they decriminalized drugs, but they also took that money from law enforcement and put it towards jobs training, healthcare, housing, so that people had treatment, so people had a way out of their opiate addiction.
Right.
Now they cut back on the on the treatment and some of these social programs, and now they're not doing as well either. But you can't just decriminalize. You have to decriminalize and like help people at the same time. And we could afford to if you take the billions that we spend on law enforcement. So I think they made a mistake both in how they decriminalized in Oregon, and I think it's a mistake to recriminalize. So I just think there's a lot to learn from like both directions.
Yeah, that's it. I just think it's really crazy. I don't know.
It is. I mean, it doesn't sound like it's going well there, but
no,
it's not going well anywhere else. I mean, criminalization is no worse. I mean, people still have the addiction, and then they have law enforcement entanglement, which like makes their life all that much more difficult.
And what I've found is they seem to just keep focusing on Portland. Well, Portland, as we say here, Portland is a drug haven anyway. You know, like every other,
Absolutely.
you know. Every other city, you know, that is out here. So I don't know, you know, I don't know. Is it like that in the rest of the state?
I don't know. And it's hard to compare rural versus urban. I mean, Massachusetts, we have Mass and Cass. We have this whole area of town where like, it's this like addicted homeless camping settlement. And it's really sad. And no one knows what to do about it. And we haven't decriminalized. But I honestly think that, like, I had a piece in Time magazine earlier this year about how decriminalizing opiates would save countless lives. I genuinely think if like people had a legal way to get opiates that didn't involve like begging a doctor, and the DA wasn't like pressuring the doctors to prescribe fewer opiates, and if chronic pain patients and people who are addicted had a reasonable way to get opiates, nobody would be dying from fentanyl because they wouldn't have to buy it on the streets. So I just think we have to make these things more available. And I just don't think criminalization is the way to go for like any drugs. We use the money for education and for regulation and stop throwing people in prison.
Yeah.
I think one thing I've learned from Oregon is what I've been telling New Jersey legislators: listen, using Guattari's words against him when he wanted to get legalization, we shouldn't let perfect be the enemy of the good. So you try something, but if you need a cleanup bill or reverse it, you can. It's not like, as an example, home grow for patients. If all the things that you thought would happen bad happened, then you can undo it. I mean, but you don't have to guess what would take care of everything, because you can't. So, as bad as it worked out, just with overall just legalizing everything, is a learning experience, if nothing else, and
Yeah, and again, you can't just decriminalize without treating people and giving
right, exactly.
pathway towards a better life. I mean, I know from personal experience, once you're addicted to opiates, it's like an all-consuming experience, and it's really hard to get out of it, and you need help. And if you're, just, it's great to take away the law enforcement component, which I think is making everything worse, but you also have to help people, or it's just not going to work.
Peter, you're a fellow spiny. How do you deal with back pain? Because I have neuropathy, I have degenerative disc disease, and I have a lot of pain, and I do a lot of natural things. What do you do for you have back pain, I'm sure. What do you do for your back pain?
I mean, I find that if I exercise, it's a lot better. If I swim, find what exercise to strengthen your back, like strengthen your core as well. I think if like your body's strong, then it puts less wear and tear on your back. Like, so I did a lot of physical therapy. And then I find if I get enough sleep, I'm in much less pain. I think that sleep is really critical. And then, I find cannabis helpful, but, I just, I think being a healthy person is the best thing you could do, just like connecting with people, controlling your anxiety, sleeping well, eating well, exercising. I just think all those things really, really help with pain. And I'm a big advocate of physical therapy. Then when it comes to drugs, I actually think cannabis is safer than the nonsteroidals, the ibuprofen, the Advil, the Naprosyn, the diclofenac. I mean, 10,000 people a year die from those, just from heart attacks. And then there's the bleeding ulcers and the kidney damage that you get from taking them year after year after year. And, there just aren't a lot of great options for pain because nobody wants to be on opiates. Tylenol doesn't do anything, and the nonsteroidals are deadly. So I think cannabis is a good option, but I really am a big believer in like trying to prevent the pain in the first place by doing physical therapy and by swimming and walking a lot and making the rest of your muscles strong, so you're not stressing out those particular vertebrae.
Have you ever tried acupuncture?
It's funny. I did try acupuncture when I was in rehab. They sent us to acupuncture. I think the acupuncture place was owned by the same people that owned the rehab facility. So I was very suspicious to start with. But the other people I was with, my friends, thought it was great. I thought it was miserable, like really uncomfortable. I had a really bad experience with acupuncture. But I'm not against it. I've had plenty of patients that like it and have benefited from it. I just personally didn't work at all with me.
Yeah, I've had good experiences and bad experiences with it, depending on
Yeah.
the person.
I mean, I'm open-minded. I mean, I don't get why everybody has to be either in like the Western medicine camp or the alternative medicine camp. I think there's a lot to learn from both of them. And that's another area where like there's a lot of common ground.
Yeah, I got deep tissue massage in my neck today, and I really needed it bad because my neck's been really stiff. And one of my screws is popping out of my neck. It was
Oh, that is not good.
No, it's not good.
Yeah, no, I'm worried about that because I broke my leg in this summer and I'm worried about one of the screws coming out. I got this little lump in my leg. Hopefully it's just a lump and not a screw coming out. I don't know what they do if the screw comes out. Do they have to like do the whole thing over again? I don't want to think about it.
I know. Revision surgery for spine is awful.
My spinal surgery is not fun. I would not recommend it if you could avoid it.
Did you have lower back surgery or
yeah,
cervical?
I just had a little sciatica and my doctor did a MRI. We thought there might be a disc, and she called me in my cell like 2 hours later and said, "You're going to have surgery within a week or two. You have critical spinal stenosis." And I'm like, "What are you talking about? I have patients scheduled. There's no way I could have surgery in the next 6 months. And she's like, you're having it in the next week or two. And I got like quasi emergency surgery because she said it was so narrow that if I'd like fallen backwards, I could have like paralyzed myself. Not that I fall backwards very often, but that's like what she was worried about, that it was like very fragile. So I had it for this critical spinal stenosis, which is really weird. Nobody understands why I would have that, but the body does weird things, right?
My husband too. He had the same issue,
Yeah.
and he had the surgery, and he said he would never have that surgery again.
Yeah, well, the surgery.
I mean, his downtime was, I can tell you, was like literally 3 weeks, and he was bored, and he went back to work.
Yeah.
You know how you guys are. So, yeah, but he did say that, and he said
much of a choice though. I think that's one of the surgeries they actually insist on.
Yeah,
sort of like you have a huge aorta, they're going to fix it because you blow up at any time.
Yeah.
All right, I do have to sign off though. I'm getting really sleepy here. We've been going for a long
Peter,
time.
thank you so much. How can we get your book? How do we?
You can get my book. My book is called "Seeing Through the Smoke: A Cannabis Specialist Untangles the Truth About Marijuana," and you can either just get it on Amazon or on my website, which is just petergrinspoon.com. You can get there's a link to my book, but also you could ask me questions. So if anybody has any follow-up questions, just find me on my website, petergrinspoon.com, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Wow, that's awesome.
Awesome.
Probably tomorrow though. I'm tired.
I mean, there's no way I'm going to read a book like that and not have questions. So that's pretty cool. That's pretty cool.
Especially Jim.
Yeah. And
it's literally 4:20 it's 4:20 in the morning though at Helsinki time as we speak.
No.
That's funny.
It's always 4:20 somewhere, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Hey, thanks for taking the time and going the distance here tonight.
Yeah, thanks, Peter.
Thank you guys for having me.
It's been a pleasure and an honor to
Yes,
have
sir.
you just sitting with our little group here. It was this is going to play well too, for those who weren't able to watch tonight.
And Peter's going to be on the Cannabis Nurses Network next week.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
No, I'm sorry, May 2nd.
Sometime in May,
right?
Not next week. I'm like, oh no, not again.
Don't do that to him. He's on Helsinki time. You're messing with him.
Yeah, I think it's within like 3 weeks. I can tell you when it is. I mean, I have it.
This has been a really good show.
Yeah, it's been really fun. I think I'm on the Cannabis Nurses Network at 7:30 on Thursday the 2nd. So May 2nd. So in about 3 weeks, 3 or 4 weeks.
Yeah, so I'll see you then.
Yeah, look forward to it. All right, thank you guys.
Back and forth.
Thank you. Good night.
Well, thank you, Peter. Thank you so
All right,
much.
thanks for the great questions. Take care.
See you again.
You too.
I want to thank cmmnj.org. I want to thank CannaSense, UFCW, Jackson Storm, Smoking Monkey, Arlo Glass, OprahMachine.com, and SativaCross.org. You can donate to SativaCross.org for wheelchair ramps. We're looking for wheelchair ramps this year. I don't know if you know that, Peter, but we donate wheelchair ramps to unramped businesses. In New Jersey, we have a lot of unramped businesses, and that's one of our fights here.
That's awesome that you do that because I broke my leg in August. And I was in a wheelchair for like months, and like without a wheelchair ramp, you're just out of luck. It's nobody's fault that they're in a wheelchair. So that's wonderful that you guys do that.
Yeah. You had problems getting into businesses in up where you're at?
I think the laws are pretty strict here. So I think most of the businesses have handicap access. I think this is one of the things that Massachusetts I think is pretty good about.
Okay. Yeah, not in Jersey.
Yeah.
Well, thanks again.
Terrible.
All right. Take care, you guys. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. I'll see you May 2nd.
See you in a few weeks. Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Our list begins with Cheryl, Sabina, Diane, Gracie, Cindy Mae, Marie, Jack, Joan, Randy, Polly, Bill, Chad, Jeremy, Colette, Matt, Troy, Russ, Roger, Jay, Ella, Hattie, Jackie, Anthony, Jake, Armando, Felicia, Lynn, Dan, Sean, Joyce, Lori, Frank, Brian, Flo, Carl, Thorne, Frank, Rain, Terry, Charlotte, Cher, Jaybird, Michael, Marley, Colette, Brendan, Red, Rico, Lulu, Becky, Lawanda, Chip, Paul, Jeff.
That's a long fucking list.
Oh, wow, that's sad.
It is. It's funny. Not funny, but it affects me different every night because I can't actually have time to react to every name. So it's sort of like it's like getting slapped, and you miss a couple and getting slapped, and it's different people at different times, you know. And I reflect for a second, you miss 3 names, but does it to me every time, you know. I mean, it's good to.
Who got you tonight, Roger?
Yeah, how do you know?
Because we talked about nurses in the schools giving cannabis to kids in school.
That was all him.
Yeah, it was Roger.
And it put a
We
huge.
didn't mention him during the show, but we're going to mention him now because he was a big part of that, and that actually killed him.
Yeah, that was him. Yeah, and he just like lost a lot of weight doing it, and not a lot, but noticeably, and it put such a strain on him, you know, because he has a business too, you know, and yeah, it was such a big strain, but he got to see it happen, you know.
Yeah.
And he got a whole new family he never bargained for with us, you know. And it's like, come on, Roger, come on over to the dark side for a little bit, try a dab, you know.
We love that.
But that you know, that they broke that sacred shield, that and you know, like Chris was saying, it's all true. You know that Laura had to, you know, leave work and go there and an hour back just to say, here you are, and a sip from a cup, and then back. You know, that a nurse couldn't even hold that up and do that. That it took that, and it was, you know, it seemed like it was by design to slow it down. It was like Governor Christie made up those rules or something, you know, just to give it. But anyway, you know, and the world's a little better place for breaking that logjam, and you know, it's getting better.
You know, I just want to. I probably shouldn't even say this on here. Never mind. I'll text you guys.
I love that. What could it be? Mystery DM.
But you love me too.
What's the mystery DM gonna be? I wonder. What subjects should we cover?
And I'll get a 1-word answer from Lefty. Okay.
Of course, I'm very easy. I'm very agreeable usually. Anything you want, I'm agreeable to. It's all good.
Okay.
Going to the Jacob Javits is going to be a challenge.
We're gonna have fun. That'll be fun.
It's going to be a challenge for me because we're taking a ferry, right?
Yeah.
Okay, from Weehawken.
Yeah, unless you want to take it from somewhere else. You want to take it from.
How far is the ferry station from the Jacob Javits Center?
It's right there.
Okay, because I'm bringing my chair. There's no way I can go that long of a day without my chair. I'm going to have to bring my chair, and I'm good for.
You'll be good.
I'm good for a few hours with that thing.
Yeah. No, Jacob Javits, you go crossing the ferry, you know, that takes all 2 minutes, and it's right across the street.
Perfect.
Right there.
Perfect. Okay. Because, yeah, I can't walk that far. I will be dying. And, yeah. So my chair will keep me going throughout the day. I'll be fine.
And then I would have to be a nurse.
No, I'm good. I can stick my dad pens in there. I can't do nothing. You know, wheelchairs are a security risk. I could do anything in a wheelchair, and you'd never know. I could have anything in there. Like if you had bad intentions, I've never had an issue with security. I go right through. I could have anything on me. I have bongs on me. I've had all kinds of. I got into all kinds of events with all kinds of stuff because it's the wheelchair.
You know, I was working in Kentucky once. This is just like, you know, a stupid story. But anyway, I was working in Kentucky, and what was called Hazard, Kentucky. This is when they were building these big consortiums. And when I decided that's it, I'm out of hospitals, I went to go work with a law firm, and they sent me all over the place as the nurse for them. So they sent me to Kentucky, and I landed in Lexington. So of course I thought, Lexington was beautiful. So I was like, oh, okay, yeah, I'll do this. I'll get my team together. And the main hospital was in Hazard, Kentucky, which is coal miners' country. Harlan is right next door. They made a song, "You'll never get out of Harlan alive," right? So I had this big Bowie knife because people were just really, really crazy, and I didn't know that I could just buy a gun there, and that would be okay, So I was leaving. I was at the airport in Kentucky.
Roadside gun.
Yeah. Anyway, so I'm at the airport. I'm checking in, and I have my bag on, the roller thing.
Oh, no.
And the attendant says to me, "What's this?" And she takes out my big knife. I forgot it was in there.
Oh no.
And she said, "What are you doing with this knife?" And I said, "I don't know, gotten deer." So she said to me, "Why didn't you just buy a gun?" So I said, "Because I'm not from the state." So she said, "So what? Go to the flea market on a Sunday and just buy a gun." So I was like, "Oh, okay." They actually told me I could go back upstairs. Now imagine this happening in Newark. Not. I would have had the bracelets on. But they sent me back upstairs to my luggage because it wasn't loaded yet, and said, "Just put it in your luggage." And I did. And I went home with it.
Wow.
I still have that knife too.
Wow.
Anyway. All right, guys, listen, this was
Yep.
great. We had fun, and
Yeah.
I'll
That was
talk
good.
to you both during the week. Okay. And we'll come up with some more stuff, some more people. Think of who you want. Okay.
Yeah, that was good.
All right. All right. I'll hunt down anybody. It doesn't matter. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. I love you guys.
Thanks.
Have a good night. Okay.
Bye bye.
Bye.
Bye bye.